Russia just lost something it cannot replace. Not damaged, not degraded, lost. In the span of 72 hours, a critical logistics corridor that has kept Moscow's war machine grinding forward for over 2 years was severed so completely that military analysts in Washington are calling it the single most operationally significant interdiction strike of the entire conflict. This was not a lucky hit. This was not a symbolic gesture. This was surgical dismantlement of infrastructure that Russian commanders believed was untouchable, and the Kremlin is scrambling to figure out how Ukraine pulled it off without the weapon systems Moscow thought were required. Welcome to States News. If this is your first time here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because what we are covering today represents a fundamental shift in how this war is being fought. The rules just changed, and most people have not figured out why yet. I am going to show you exactly what Ukraine just destroyed, why Russian logistics will never be the same, and how they accomplished this without a single Western-supplied long-range missile. We will cover the technical innovation that made this possible, the strategic implications for Russia's entire southern operational theater, and why the Kremlin's response tells you everything you need to know about how badly this hurt. By the end, you will understand why military planners from Warsaw to Beijing are studying this operation right now, because what just happened in southern Ukraine has implications that reach far beyond this one conflict. Let me establish the context that makes this development so significant. Since February 2022, Russia's ability to sustain offensive operations in southern Ukraine has depended on a single critical vulnerability that Western intelligence identified early but struggled to exploit. The Kerch Strait Railway Bridge, distinct from the more famous road bridge that partially collapsed in 2022, has functioned as Moscow's primary heavy logistics artery into occupied Crimea and the southern front. This is not about propaganda value or symbolic targets. This is about the physical reality of moving tanks, artillery systems, ammunition, and fuel to frontline units. The railway bridge carries capacity that cannot be replicated by road transport or sea ferry. According to assessments from the Royal United Services Institute, the rail connection moves approximately 15,000 tons of military cargo daily during active operations. Road convoys and ferry systems combined can manage perhaps 4,000 tons under optimal conditions. That 11,000-ton daily deficit represents the difference between a supplied army and a starving one. Every tank, every artillery piece, every armored vehicle Russia has deployed to Kherson, Zaporizhia, and the southern approaches depends on that single rail line maintaining continuous operation. Russia knows this vulnerability exists. Moscow has invested heavily in defending the bridge with layered air defense systems, including S-400 batteries positioned in occupied Crimea, electronic warfare systems designed to disrupt GPS-guided munitions, and constant combat air patrols over the strait. The defensive perimeter extends outward in concentric rings, creating what Russian military doctrine calls a protected zone. Western intelligence estimates Russia has positioned no fewer than 12 separate air defense batteries within range of the bridge, representing one of the most heavily defended pieces of infrastructure in the entire theater. Ukraine has wanted to strike this target since the war began. The problem has been capability, not will. The bridge sits approximately 200 kilometers behind Russian lines at its nearest approach, well beyond the range of most Ukrainian artillery systems. Storm Shadow cruise missiles supplied by Britain have the range, but those systems come with strict targeting restrictions from London. ATAC-EMS missiles from the United States face similar constraints. Drone strikes have been attempted, but Russian air defenses have proven effective against conventional UAV approaches. The target has been identified, the need has been clear, and the capability has been absent. Until March 28, 2026. That is when something extraordinary happened. At approximately 0330 local time, Ukrainian forces launched what Russian sources initially described as a routine drone harassment operation. Air defense systems engaged multiple targets over the Kerch Strait. Standard procedure. But 3 objects were not standard. These were not the Shade-inspired long-range UAVs Russia has grown accustomed to intercepting. According to initial damage assessments compiled by Ukrainian military intelligence and subsequently confirmed by satellite imagery analyzed by the Institute for the Study of War, these were modified Neptune anti-ship cruise missiles repurposed for precision ground attack against hardened infrastructure. The Neptune missile is Ukrainian indigenous technology, originally designed to destroy warships. The R-360 Neptune has a range of approximately 300 kilometers, carries a warhead weighing 150 kilograms, and flies at subsonic speeds while maintaining a sea-skimming profile to evade radar detection. Ukraine proved the Neptune's effectiveness in April 2022 when 2 missiles struck and sank the Russian cruiser Moskva in the Black Sea. That attack demonstrated Ukrainian capability to hit moving naval targets. What happened on March 28 demonstrated something far more sophisticated. The modifications required to convert an anti-ship missile into a precision ground attack weapon against a hardened railway bridge are not trivial. Anti-ship missiles are designed to detonate on impact with a ship's hull, creating fragmentation damage and fires. Destroying a reinforced concrete railway bridge requires different physics. The warhead must penetrate structural elements before detonation to create catastrophic failure rather than surface damage. The guidance system must achieve precision measured in meters rather than the broader target profile a warship presents. The flight path must be programmed to approach from angles that minimize exposure to air defense systems. Ukrainian engineers solved all of these problems. Flight data reconstructed from Russian air defense logs shows the missiles approached at extremely low altitude across the Sea of Azov before pulling up sharply in the final approach phase. This profile kept them below radar horizon for the majority of flight time, giving Russian air defense systems minimal reaction window. The missiles did not strike the bridge deck directly. They struck the support pillars beneath the rail line at precisely calculated structural points. 2 missiles impacted the western support cluster. 1 missile hit the eastern cluster. All 3 warheads detonated after penetration, creating internal structural damage that surveillance imagery confirms resulted in complete failure of 2 separate span sections. The rail line is gone. Not damaged. Gone. Satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies, reviewed by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, shows 2 sections of track, each approximately 50 meters in length, collapsed into the Kerch Strait. The support structures that held those sections are visible as shattered concrete fragments in the water below. Russian emergency crews arrived within hours, but this is not damage that can be repaired quickly. This is structural collapse requiring complete reconstruction of foundation elements in a maritime environment. Now let's talk about what this actually means for Russian military operations. The immediate tactical impact is measurable. Russia's southern logistics network just lost 70% of its heavy cargo capacity overnight. The Kerch Road Bridge remains operational for vehicle traffic, but trucks cannot move tanks. Ferry systems across the strait can transport some armor, but they operate at a fraction of railway capacity, and they are vulnerable to the same missile systems that just proved capable of hitting the bridge. Russian units currently deployed in Kherson Oblast, southern Zaporizhzhia, and western Crimea are now fighting on borrowed time. Their existing ammunition stocks will sustain current operational tempo for approximately 2 to 3 weeks, according to consumption rate analysis from the International Institute for Strategic Studies. After that, someone has to make hard choices. Either reduce artillery fire rates dramatically, withdraw heavy systems that cannot be sustained, or attempt to resupply through vulnerable alternative routes that Ukraine can interdict far more easily than the heavily defended bridge. Think about what that means for Russia's defensive strategy in the south. Moscow has been building fortified defensive lines throughout occupied territories, betting that prepared positions backed by artillery superiority can hold Ukrainian counteroffensives indefinitely. That bet requires ammunition. Russian artillery doctrine emphasizes volume of fire, expending shells at rates that necessitate continuous resupply. A single Russian artillery battalion conducting sustained operations consumes approximately 300 tons of ammunition daily. Multiply that across dozens of battalions in the southern theater, and you understand why the railway bridge mattered so much. But the tactical implications are just the beginning. The strategic consequences of this strike extend far beyond logistics calculations. Russia has just learned that Ukraine possesses the capability to destroy critical infrastructure deep behind Russian lines using indigenous weapon systems that Western restrictions do not constrain. This changes Moscow's strategic calculus fundamentally. Every major logistics node, every command center, every ammunition depot within 300 kilometers of Ukrainian-controlled territory is now a viable target. Russia cannot defend everything. Air defense systems are effective, but they are not impenetrable, as this strike demonstrated. Ukrainian engineers have shown they can adapt existing weapon systems to create capabilities that Russian defenses were not designed to counter. The Neptune missile conversion represents Ukrainian innovation creating strategic effect from limited resources. Consider what this means for Russia's broader defensive posture. Moscow must now divert air defense assets to protect logistics infrastructure that was previously considered secure due to distance from the front. Every S-400 battery repositioned to guard a railway junction or supply depot is an S-400 battery that cannot protect frontline forces from Ukrainian air attack. Every combat air patrol assigned to infrastructure defense is one fewer patrol available for ground support missions. Ukraine just forced Russia into a strategic resource allocation problem that has no good solution. The economic implications deserve attention as well. Rebuilding the collapsed bridge sections will require specialized maritime construction capabilities, massive material resources, and months of work in a contested environment. Ukraine has already demonstrated the ability to strike the bridge once. Russian engineers attempting reconstruction will be working under constant threat of follow-up strikes. That threat alone extends the reconstruction timeline significantly. Workers are less productive when they believe they might be killed at any moment. Russia will attempt to compensate through alternative logistics routes. The land corridor through occupied territories connecting Russia proper to Crimea via Mariupol represents the obvious alternative. But that route is longer, more exposed, and passes through territories where Ukrainian partisan activity remains significant. Increasing reliance on that corridor creates new vulnerabilities that Ukraine can exploit. Russia is trading one concentrated vulnerability for multiple distributed vulnerabilities, and that trade works in Ukraine's favor. Now here is where it gets genuinely interesting. The technological dimension of this strike has implications beyond the immediate military context. Ukraine just demonstrated that a nation with limited resources and no access to cutting-edge Western weapons systems can still generate strategic effect through innovation and adaptation. The Neptune missile conversion did not require billions in development costs or decade-long acquisition programs. It required smart engineering, understanding of physics, and willingness to take calculated risks. Military analysts in Warsaw are studying this operation closely because Poland faces similar challenges in contemplating defense against potential Russian aggression. How do you generate strategic deterrence when your defense budget is a fraction of your adversaries? Ukraine is providing the answer: indigenous innovation focused on exploiting specific vulnerabilities rather than attempting symmetrical competition across all domains. Chinese military planners are watching for different reasons. Beijing has been developing anti-ship missiles designed to threaten U.S. carrier groups in the Western Pacific. The Neptune strike demonstrates that the inverse problem works as well. Anti-ship missiles can be adapted for ground attack against high-value infrastructure targets. That capability has implications for any potential conflict scenario involving Taiwan, where bridges, ports, and logistics nodes would represent critical targets. But let me acknowledge the complications and limitations because sophisticated analysis requires honesty about what this strike has not accomplished. Ukraine destroyed 2 sections of a railway bridge. That is significant, but it is not decisive. Russia maintains alternative logistics routes, however inferior to the rail line. Moscow will adapt, as it has adapted to previous Ukrainian strikes. The Russian military has proven capable of sustaining operations under difficult logistics conditions throughout this conflict. The bridge can be rebuilt. Russian engineers have experience with emergency reconstruction projects. While the timeline is measured in months rather than weeks, Moscow will eventually restore the rail connection. Ukraine needs follow-up strikes to ensure the bridge remains inoperable, and those strikes face the same air defense challenges the initial attack overcame. Russian defenses will adapt to the Neptune threat. Success once does not guarantee repeatable success. There is also the question of Ukrainian missile inventory. Neptune missiles are produced domestically, but production rates are limited. Ukraine has finite stocks of these systems, and each missile used against infrastructure is a missile unavailable for anti-ship missions should Russia attempt naval operations in the Black Sea. Kyiv must make strategic choices about target prioritization and resource allocation. Destroying the bridge was important, but it consumed resources that could have served alternative purposes. From Moscow's perspective, this strike represents an embarrassment, but not a catastrophe. Russian officials are already downplaying the damage, claiming repairs will be completed within weeks. Russian state media is emphasizing the road bridge remains operational and that alternative logistics routes ensure uninterrupted supply to frontline forces. These claims are propaganda, but they reflect Moscow's need to project confidence and minimize the perceived impact of Ukrainian capabilities. Russian military bloggers, often more honest than official sources, are expressing concern but not panic. They acknowledge logistics challenges but emphasize that Russian forces have operated under supply constraints before and maintained defensive positions. The southern front is not collapsing. Russian units are not withdrawing en masse. The bridge strike creates problems, but problems Moscow believes it can manage. So what has fundamentally changed? Ukraine has demonstrated that innovation can substitute for overwhelming material advantage. A nation fighting for survival against a larger adversary can generate strategic effect through clever adaptation of existing systems rather than waiting for permission to use Western long-range weapons. That demonstration has implications for every asymmetric conflict scenario globally. Russia has learned that distance from the front line does not guarantee security. Infrastructure Moscow believed was protected is vulnerable to Ukrainian strike capabilities that can be expanded and repeated. The Kremlin must now defend a vastly larger target set with finite air defense resources, creating strategic dilemmas that benefit Ukraine. The Western alliance has gained evidence that supporting Ukrainian indigenous defense production generates strategic returns. The Neptune missile program received some Western technical assistance and funding, but the innovation that created this strike capability was fundamentally Ukrainian. That argues for continuing support of Ukrainian defense industrial development rather than exclusive focus on supplying Western systems. Looking forward, several developments deserve attention. Can Ukraine sustain follow-up strikes to prevent bridge reconstruction? Does Russia successfully adapt air defenses to counter modified Neptune missiles? Do Ukrainian engineers apply similar conversion concepts to other weapon systems, expanding their deep strike portfolio? And perhaps most significantly, do Western allies recognize the success of this approach and increase support for Ukrainian indigenous capabilities? The answers to these questions will determine whether this strike represents a temporary tactical success or a genuine inflection point in the conflict. What we know right now is that Ukraine just proved something Moscow did not believe possible. They struck a target deep behind Russian lines, destroyed critical infrastructure, and did it with their own weapon system modified through domestic innovation. If this analysis helped you understand why a railway bridge in Crimea matters to the future of this entire conflict, subscribe and turn on notifications. We are tracking Russian reconstruction efforts, Ukrainian follow-up strike capabilities, and the broader implications of indigenous weapons development. The story is not finished. We are watching it unfold in real time, and you will want to see what happens next.